Well, thank you, Jeanette. That really was food for the soul, I think. There have been some dispiriting headlines, to put it mildly, in New Zealand of late. But, you know, your last visit helped bring change. There has been a lot of change. We need more, and we need more encouragement, and you've certainly brought that tonight. And I must say, it was so wonderful to see all the iconic images of New York flashed up. But I think what struck me was this bike lash paradox, that there's an awful lot of noise from a vocal minority, but actually the silent majority rather likes the kinds of changes that are brought. Would you like to elaborate on that a wee bit more?
I think that's true. And I think that, you know, you do have that phenomenon of the loudest voice in the room. Like it's easy to be against a project, right? It's easy to say, oh, this is terrible. It's bad for business. It's awful. There's more traffic. It's worse than ever. Stores are disappearing. But what we've really found is that the proof is really in the project. And when you make the changes, actually, and people can see and touch and feel them and enjoy them, it goes a long way to persuading people. And another big piece I think that cities increasingly have come to realize is the importance of data and actually measuring the impact of projects on the street, because it's really easy just to have an anecdote about how things are happening. And a lot of times it's kind of like catnip for like reporters. Like they're just looking for somebody to say, this is terrible, right? Because saying like, oh, this is great, doesn't get the same kind of buzz. And so being able to have the data that shows, actually, this is better for business. Actually, this is safer for people. Actually, this moves more people than, you know, were moved before. Very important in making the case, because I think we have to start to reframe the way we talk about some of these projects. I never cut a ribbon on a bike lane the entire time that I was at New York City DOT, right? I cut ribbons on better streets that included bike lanes, but bus lanes and safer crossings. So I think that's an important part, I think, of the language of change that we need to sort of adopt in this new environment to deal with things like backlash.
One of our questions which came through on Slido from Lucy was, a major obstacle to many street changes in Auckland is small and medium-sized business. How can we engage them to support change? And I guess your answer would be along the lines of show the data of what's happened to profitability where these changes have come in. It hasn't hurt trade, correct?
Yeah, no, I think we've seen that in studies around the world. But I will say that like local business people, a lot of times when you're starting up, they don't care, right? That's that street. This is my street. You don't know my street, right? Like I don't really care what happened in New York City, and I don't care what happened here 10 years ago, right? So one of the things that we found when we were working with local businesses is we went door to door with all of them. And in a lot of instances, the regulations in front of their stores hadn't changed in years, right? So we were actually able to help them change some of the regulations, extend the hours for deliveries, change the hours of operation, and had a conversation about what we were doing. And that helped. But I do think that the proof is in the pudding of the project. And we were not going to, I remember getting this question when I was in Toronto, like, how did you get 100% consensus behind your bike lanes? It's like, it's only a question that a Canadian could ask, right? You're not going to get 100% consensus. You just have to move forward and be deliberate in the way that you are making the changes, be flexible to tailor them, and communicate what's happening.
One of the depressing things about culture wars is they're often based just on belief and never on data. So how do you break through on that? Because there will be some who will just never accept whatever facts and evidence is put in front of them. That I guess what you're saying is just keep going. If you think it's the right direction, and I think having Mayor Bloomberg behind you was incredibly important. The bosses behind you, you're encouraged to go on. But where do you see this culture war on bikes and pedestrianisation sort of panning out?
Yeah, I think we're in a global crisis, right? And so many levels. And it's only so long that you can, stick your head in the ground about this. But you're right. I did work for an extraordinary mayor, and he used to say, "In God we trust, everyone else bring data." So we brought lots and lots of data, and we presented the data in different ways, right? We didn't just put out a dry report that said, oh, here are the, north, south, east, west, traffic signal timing improvements, right? Like we were talking about the people. We were telling the story of how many more people were on the street, of exactly, 50% more people, 50% increase in sales, different kinds of ways of telling a story and having the story come from the people who were affected and not just from the agency, because that's a much more powerful frame than just, hi, I'm from the New York City Department of Transportation and here to help, right? As compelling as I think that is.
Now, here's a question which is relevant in all our aging societies. What does an age-friendly lens look like when reviewing facilities, public space, transport, etc., so we have an age-friendly, disability-friendly, inclusive society?
Oh, I love that question. Well, we're designing streets really that work for everyone. And we've actually just put out a new design guide. Do you have it? Streets for Kids, which actually looks at designing streets from the perspective of a 3-year-old, right? How do we design for a street for a 3-year-old? What does that look like? And now you have your own copy, Designing Streets for Kids. And it's really compelling because it changes the way you look at the street. Like if you're holding the hand of a 3-year-old, can you get across the signal? Can you get across the street in the right time? I have to say, I think your signal timing here needs a little work. Like you're rushing across the street all the time. So like I would give this to your chief traffic engineer. Because that's a part of it. But like when you do that, you make it better for older people, younger people, most people, every people, right? And that's really who we should be designing our streets for, not from behind a dashboard view of the street, right? We're not designing our streets from the perspective of a car. We're designing our streets from the perspective of the people who use them.
Lots of questions coming in. One, again, we all relate to after the COVID experience of empty streets and people not wanting to come back into crowded spaces. How do you encourage more people to come to the city, especially after COVID? We see less people coming down to the central business district here.
Well, I think it goes to that very essence of what makes a great city, right? And it's the people. And so you have to, design for activities that draw them in, right? Like one of the things that was a huge success in New York City was the outdoor dining program, right? We created these spaces for local businesses and restaurants, and we took away 10,000 parking spaces. Can you imagine taking 10,000 parking spaces away? We took away 10,000 parking spaces and opened them to people for dining. And it was this huge success. And it was great for the businesses. And guess what? It's become permanent. And it's a permanent part of the landscape now. We have a new design standard for these outdoor dining sheds. And it's been this huge home run. And it encourages people to come out and enjoy the street. And that's what we saw in the pandemic, that our streets were some of the most valuable real estate we had to make a difference, to invite people to the street, to play, to eat, to walk, to bike. And that kind of strategy works not only during the pandemic, but every time. But we're not going to wish people back into the city. We actually have to give them an invitation to come.
Yeah, a reason to be there. Here's one asks for your advice on how to give Auckland Transport the confidence to remove car lanes and replace them with dedicated bus lanes. Rather than keeping the car lanes and adding costly new bus lanes. Any advice?
Just do it.
Just do it. Well, that's succinct, and notes are being taken. Did New York need to remove on-road parking to install bike lanes? And if so, which I think it was that achieved against the inevitable opposition to taking away car parks?
Yes.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
I mean, there are like legendary stories about it, right? I mean, that was big part of the backlash. I mean, it got crazy. You were talking about like when you saw the bike share stations first arrive on the streets, and we put to start 600 stations on the city, but we had socialized it. We went community board after community board. We had an online piece where people could recommend 3 different locations where they wanted the bike share stations. We did hundreds and hundreds of meetings. And we documented it. And we put it in a report because we knew reporters would, obviously get the question like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was coming. How dare you do this?" And so we had this report that we could say, see, we told you what we were going to do. But it still had this backlash. And I remember once there was this restaurateur in Lower Manhattan, very dramatic guy. And so the bike share station was coming. And so he basically called the Fox News over, and he lay down dramatically in front of his restaurant, in the where we were putting the bike share station. And he's like, I'm not moving. And, of course, the New York PD had to come and pick him up and take him off, and bike share station went in. But it was like this big buzz, right? And then the guy had the chutzpah, like 2 weeks later, to call me to say, could I have another bike share station, do you think? So there's always, a fuss about it, but it's amazing to see what happens when people see the change and they understand the positive impact that comes with it.
I had an apartment that was 4 minutes walk from work on the corner of 47th and 1st. There's one downside of it. It was a Trump Tower. I'm now thinking that the reason you put a bike park down there early was to send a message.
I don't think his name is on that building anymore now.
Well, I was told after the election that people were moving out because it was a disincentive to be there. But anyway, so another one from Adam. What transport-related initiative that you implemented did you find had the most, quote, bang for the buck when it came to promoting travel behaviour change?
Well, I talked about it a little bit in the talk, and I really do think that it's bike lanes because they have so many dividends, right? Because they're not just for cyclists. They really make the street safer for everyone, much better for the quality of life. We were able to put in a lot of trees on our protected bike lanes. We shortened the crossing distances. People just felt safer because when you have more people on the street, it actually makes it safer. And the drivers have to look out, right? They sort of see there's more activity and they slow down naturally, which is a really important part of the investment work.
Someone asks, given that all cities need transformation, not tweaks, is any city there yet? What is needed next? More safe streets or something else as well?
I've been really, I was recently in Paris, and I have to say what Anne Hidalgo has done is nothing less than just a huge revolution. You see the amount of bike lanes that are out there. You see the huge investment in transit. That city has completely changed, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens during the Olympics. She's done a really good job of leveraging the Olympics, these big events, to make these transformative investments. And I think that's a really good recipe. Milan is going to be doing that with the Winter Olympics in 2026. They're looking at taking their downtown streets and streets around the city and pedestrianizing them for the events during the Olympics, and then they will be legacy. So so it's sort of interesting to see, but I think Paris and also London, Mayor Khan with the ultra low emission zone it's really impressive what he's done with that in low traffic neighborhoods. But again, the transit investment and the investment in the street with walking and biking, that's the kind of secret sauce for future cities.
I mean, is it fair to say that London is somewhat ahead of New York on the low emission zone planning?
Yes.
And do you see New York and the big American cities being able to do more in this respect?
Well, we're going to be implementing congestion pricing this year. So we proposed it under Mayor Bloomberg in 2007. So yay us. We're really making big progress in 2024. So it took a little while, but I have to say that when we started it, there was a majority of New Yorkers that wanted it. All of the press wanted it. All of the major newspapers endorsed it. All of the city council members endorsed it, and it got stuck up in Albany because the Capitol has authority over New York City streets. Crazy, but true. And they were able to stop it, and it didn't even come up for a vote. So it took a while to get back, but it's been passed by the legislature. It's going to happen. We have a few niggly little lawsuits that are there that will go away. But it will happen. It's just it's taken its time, but the time is now.
When we think about the new urban agenda of habitat and inclusive, safe, sustainable, resilient cities, when you were doing your planning, how did you factor in equity and inclusion as values in the agenda?
It's a great question, and it was actually a really integral part of Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC long-range plan, the sustainability agenda for New York City. So it looked at how we were going to accommodate 1 million more people in New York and improve the quality of life in business districts, but importantly in neighborhoods. And it really prioritized equity in neighborhoods. There were like 126 initiatives, I think, and things like making it possible for everyone in every part of the city to be within a 10-minute walk of a public space or a park. We focused a lot on trying to improve the livability of these neighborhoods, the walkability of these neighborhoods, the transit access in those neighborhoods. And so bringing that lens to the city was an extraordinarily important part of the work.
There's a question from Alan that asks whether compulsory helmets are a disincentive to reaching the critical mass of cyclists, similar to places like Amsterdam and Copenhagen.
Alan, the answer is yes.
We mandate helmets here, right? And I guess we kind of get used to it because we have to do it from the time a child gets on a bike, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's just
It's a whole other subject, I know. Let's not go there. Jeanette, is there any final message of encouragement you'd like to make to this wonderful Auckland audience that has hung on every word and is really interested in having a city that's people-centered and sustainable and a pleasure to live in?
I know that it's been a bit of a bumpy ride here, but again, I just have to say, you did so much. Like I looked at how much this city had changed, since the last time that I was here, and you built so many of these projects that we rode on today that weren't there. And that's all of you. All of you did that because the advocates are the ones that make it happen. The changes that I talk about in New York City make it sound like we just waved the magic wand and they all happened. But that was, 15 and 20 years worth of advocacy work. You were the ones that lay the groundwork for the change that happens. And so it may look like it's not going to happen right now. This government's not going to be in place forever. Like, you need to be working on this right now, and you've done it, right? You will. And I know that when I come back, I'm going to see amazing progress again. So thank you all for your leadership and advocacy and action. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, with that ringing exhortation to us all, Jeanette, stay seated, and I'm going to invite Richard Hills, one of our wonderful advocates for great cities here in Auckland, to come and give a vote of thanks.